This is Commission President Bill Bryant calling a special meeting on March 23rd, 2010 to order. The time is about 1:07, and we are meeting at the Cove Community Club in Normandy Park. Present with me today are Commissioners Holland, Creighton, and Albro. Commissioner Tarleton is absent. We also have with us, and I have to look to make sure I have my notes right, Port CFO Dan Thomas, General Counsel Watson, and Commission Records Supervisor Wynn. The exit locations in the event of an emergency are the doors to my left and your right that we entered through. I would like to ask everyone to please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Kind of rushed the under God there. Today is a special occasion since we are meeting at the Port is meeting here at the Cove. The Commission, as some of you might know, tries to meet at least 4 times outside of Port buildings around King County so that we can engage the community in issues of particular importance to various communities around our area. We have already met once in February of this year. We met at Aviation High School to demonstrate the Port's strong commitment to supporting that school. And a month ago, although it was at SeaTac Airport, we did meet with each of the mayors of the communities around the airport to talk about the Part 150 noise study, which is just getting started. We have had one community meeting on the Part 150 noise study, but this is the first commission meeting where we'll be taking public testimony on this matter. And we appreciate all of you coming out today and also letting us come and be a part of your community. Before we get started, we have a few matters of business to attend to. And the first is the approval of the minutes, and we have minutes from February 23rd. All commissioners were present. Is there a motion on how you'd like to proceed with those?
Mr. President, I will move approval of the minutes of the Commission's regular meeting of February 23rd, 2010.
It's been moved by Commissioner Creighton. Is there a second?
Mr. President, second.
Seconded by Commissioner Albro. Any discussion? All those in favor? Oh, Holland, I'm sorry. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, the same sign. The motion carries unanimously. The next item of business is the approval of the unanimous consent calendar. All items on the consent calendar are considered routine and are adopted by a single motion without discussion. But if any commissioner or any member of the public wants to remove an item from that agenda, it will be removed and we will deal with it separately and discuss it. There is only one item on today's consent calendar. Is there a motion on how you'd like to proceed?
Mr. President, I move that we adopt the unanimous consent calendar.
It's been moved this time by Commissioner Albro. Is there a second?
Mr. President, I will second Commissioner Albro's motion.
And seconded by Commissioner Creighton. All those in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed, the same sign. All right. Oh, okay. I think at this point we will move on to our first order of business, and I'm going to exercise the prerogative of the chair here and jump down to item 7A, which is the staff briefing on the Part 150 noise study and land compatibility study updates. Before we do begin, however, though, I would like to point out that Representative Orwell has joined us. And Representative, thank you very much for being here today. With that, let me turn this over to the staff, and then we will take public testimony.
Okay, good afternoon, Commissioners and Mr. Thomas. As requested by Commission, I am here today to give you a brief update on what the events have taken place in our last part with the Part 150 since we last talked a month ago. As a review, we have developed 2 primary forms of community participation in the project. The Highline Forum has agreed to be used as the primary outlet for the elected officials to be actively working with the Port within the Part 150 study. And we'll be holding our first kind of workshop with the Part 150 with the forum tomorrow. That's the first time we'll be working with them, although we have briefed the forum many times in the past. Our public workshops are designed to have active engagement with the community, with everyone who wants to Is this a little bit more there? All right. The public workshops are designed to have active engagement with the community as a kind of a participations in the solutions. So we don't want just to hold these open houses or as open houses. We want them to be workshops with the community. We held our first open house on a month ago, February 24th at Mount Rainier High School, and our next will be June 9th in Berrien. And I'll talk more about that in just a minute. I'd like to clarify a little bit about what the Technical Review Committee is for also. It's comprised of local land use planners, pilots, the FAA, Washington Department of Transportation Aviation, Boeing Field, Puget Sound Regional Council, and this committee is not formed to provide recommendations to the study and is not a voting committee. It is rather a committee that is in place to provide valuable input to the data that we have processed through the study, and it's also for an avenue for us to obtain data from the cities, such as GIS data, land use planning, comp plans, zoning plans, that sort of thing from the city. Due to the limited time I have today, I'm not going to go into every detail of the last public workshop on the 24th, but I'm just going to give you a brief overview of the events that happened since then. We do have a report that was put out for that public workshop, and I believe all of you have that report. There's also a posting on the web page that has all the supporting documents with that report also. So all the notes that were taken at the meetings is posted on there too. We used many methods of getting the word out for that public meeting, which comprised of ads in the newspapers and email notifications, lots of different ways we put out the notification. We had approximately 150 people show up to the workshop, including approximately 10 elected officials and staff, and several members of the Technical Review Committee showed up, FAA representatives from both the Airports Division and the FAA's Air Traffic Division also. We used a new approach during this process with the public workshops, allowing everybody to have input as much as we possibly could, knowing that there was a lot of people that had a lot of things to say about the study. We broke them out into 15 working groups and made sure all of their comments were transcribed onto note papers and then put into the report. Let's go ahead with the next slide here. Actually, we should have had the first one up. I'm going to turn this over to Victoria Evans. She's the National Urban Fellow serving with the board for this year.
So you can hear me. We created an evaluation form survey for the attendees of the meeting in order to gather more information than what you would normally get from the workshops. And these questions were related to the meeting logistics, public perception of the workshop, and some open-ended questions to gather additional thoughts. For the meeting logistics, it was very interesting, the feedback. There was a lot of feedback that we could imply right away. One thing we can do is schedule the meetings later. There was also a need to add additional handicap parking places. That was something we hadn't thought of really to accommodate the needs of the people who had attended the meeting. There was also a challenging piece of feedback in terms of the meeting logistics, and that was how to manage background noise. During the workshops, it's a lot of people are talking and engaging, and for people who were wearing hearing aids or who had hearing challenges, it was very difficult for them to hear, and so it was hard for them to fully participate. So we have to give some creative thought on how to manage that with the constraints of the rooms that we have scheduled for the meetings. In terms of public perception, the evaluations were quite positive. We asked questions such as, I was encouraged and able to participate fully in the Part 150 workshop. The public involvement workshop process was fair. The process was competent. And those questions participants could respond to: strongly disagree, disagree, somewhat agree, agree, and strongly agree. Over 95% on all, or 94% on all of those questions were answered positively, from somewhat agree to strongly agree. And 71 to 82%, there was a range, each question was a little different, answered agree and strongly agree. So I think that in whole, the perception was quite positive. In terms of open-ended questions, we just got a wealth of feedback, from frustration to ideas. And some of the positive feedback was that small groups were a great idea, that people really appreciated the opportunity to have their voices heard. One thing that was really interesting was that there was a comment that of an unintended consequence, that people who came to the workshops actually got a benefit from listening to how other people were experiencing noise. And I thought that was something worthwhile that we hadn't actually planned for. Overall, the evaluations were quite positive. They provided valuable feedback, and I think they gave us a lot of information that we can use to improve the process from here.
Victoria, what sort of response did you get in terms of number of people filling out those questions?
We had 56 evaluations. We actually attached them to the agenda so people had them when they walked in. I mean, you risk people filling them out too early, but we wanted to make sure that if somebody left early, that they had the opportunity to respond to what they had. So I think in that sense, I mean, it worked out really good. That's about a third of the people who attended.
During the facilitated discussions with the group, we asked about 6 questions of the group, and with that, we just really wanted to know what kind of noise they were experiencing, what suggestions they had for reducing the noise on the community. We received numerous comments, lots of them, and they're all contained within that document, again, that you were sent. And those will be included as potential items with the Part 150 study as we go along. I just wanted to mention a few of the concerns that we heard that I was going to mention is the operations from the third runway has increased noise over communities on the west side. Late night noise is disturbing. Want additional noise mitigation be conducted for the study and suggested some locations for it. Want more sound insulation for homes, and more mitigation below, or actually mitigation below the 65 dBl threshold. They need air conditioning installed in the homes, constructing noise walls and berms, and they're advocating for construction of a hush house for engine testing. Several of the comments go beyond what the Part 150 scope can actually do. And just to throw you an idea of what some of those were, curfews on nighttime flights, moving the airport to another location, limiting operations to only quieter aircraft, and placing a tax on aircraft during the nighttime hours. Those are not normally done in a Part 150 study. Let's go to the next slide here. At the February 23rd commission briefing with the roundtable with the local elected officials, many excellent suggestions were thrown out, and we heard a lot of the same suggestions during that meeting, and those will all be also included in the Part 150 study as potential suggestions for the items. For the most part, like I said, they were similar to the 24th, the public open house, but there were some that were a little bit outside of that. Just to throw out a few, there was supplemental metrics. I heard loud and clear that we want to have a better understanding of the noise out there and different from DNL. So we do have in the scope of work sound exposure levels, which is a single event metric. We'll be using that among a few others that we can take a look at too, just to better explain the environment. And it was suggested to seek presentations by city councils.
You need to speak into the mic.
Okay. We also heard suggestions that to seek presentations from city councils and not just have them come to us. So we actively sent out an email also requesting that they contact us at any time for these meetings. So far we haven't heard anything back. We heard a couple back that it just didn't feel it was time yet for them to have the presentations, but we'll continue to work with them. A comment was also made to have an additional or supplemental person on the technical review committee that understood the long-range planning for communities. So we did send out an email to the cities that have representation on the technical review committee, asking them if they want to have another staff member placed on that committee that would better understand the long-range planning for their communities. We haven't heard anything back on that from the communities either. We also provided responses to the local mayors and commission about stormwater runoff and the rental car facility and information on the port's air quality program. So those were sent out on emails. Let's go to the next slide here. Nope. Our next steps are to review all of the input that we have received over all of the meetings that we've been in and make sure that that is all included within the Part 150 study. We're in the process of gathering all of our data.
Commissioner Albro.
Excuse me, Stan.
Sure, go ahead.
Am I on here?
Yep.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to make sure I heard what I thought you said, which
Okay.
is great. Several things. One, we have extended an invitation or a request to be on city council agendas for those communities surrounding the airport, and we're waiting to hear back.
Correct.
And so I'm glad for that. I hope we would follow up and get on their agenda sooner than later. Also, that we've added a metric to help us understand the impact of single noise events as opposed to kind of the ongoing noise event, aggregation of noise.
That is correct. We'll do what we call the sound exposure level, which is a one-time event, or we can do a time above metric, that sort of thing, too.
So we'll be looking at both.
Yeah, we can look at several different methods. There's several different ways to look at noise in order to more explain the impact. Sometimes if you want to just know the one event, it's the sound exposure level, the single event. If you want to look at several events over a given hour or something, we have ways to do that too.
And that is a change that's emerged from our meeting with the mayors a month ago.
What's that?
That's a change in how we're going to conduct the study that emerged from that meeting with the mayors a month ago.
That is suggestions from that meeting. It was always a part of the scope of work that we had from the Part 150, but through that suggestions, we understand a little bit more what they're after, correct?
Commissioner.
Yeah, finish your,
Although as Commissioner Bryant pointed out, you usually speak for me anyway. So I guess my last point is one of the things I was interested in and made comment to was the desire to see a modeling of the noise impacts in a fully utilized facility, 45 million passengers, if you will. And I just didn't hear that in the scope of work, and I want to make sure that that is in the scope of work.
We've looked at ways to determine the maximum impact to the airport and looking out into the future on what that would be. And actually, that'll bring me kind of into our next slide here to talk about that a little bit. When we looked at the future forecasting for operations, we just don't know when it's going to be maxed out with the airport. We're still talking about 550,000 operations at the airport. We were looking, if you see on this slide, it was about 2025 when we were looking at the master plan to max out operations at the airport. And in this comprehensive development plan, we were looking at a little bit different slope. Right now, what we're looking at is this black line. We can see that traffic is declining continually. So it's a little bit hard to project out into the future what the noise is going to be like when we can't accurately see what the economy is going to do in reflection to the air traffic with the region.
So said differently, we're having a difficult time modeling 45 million passengers when we don't know the number of takeoff and landings because of the aircraft getting larger perhaps, and also the noise impact because of changes in aircraft?
That's correct. And this next slide I have here kind of answers that question too. We have continual rise in passengers, but passengers don't equate to noise. It's only the aircraft that equate to noise. So we're still looking at, seeing a decline in operations, but an increase in traffic with the passengers itself. We are going to look at a 10-year contour, and we think that that's a little bit more realistic. It's always looking at aircraft or traffic forecasting is more of an art than a science. You just can never get there. When we tried to look at the operations back in the environmental impact statement for the third runway, we were predicting 475,000 operations, and today we're not seeing that. We're still at 330,000 operations for the time frame.
So we're moving as many passengers or more with fewer flights.
That is correct, yes. So the passengers keep continuing to rise, but our air traffic is declining still. It's not an easy thing to do. I mean, to look at in the future, I just don't think you would see any accuracy whatsoever looking that far into the future, trying to produce a noise contour. I think you're getting iffy when you try to produce the 10-year contour, but that's something we're going to try and do, to look at the fleet mix and the operations that we continually either increase or decrease over the time. We'll try to figure out what the economy is going to do in 10 years.
Well, I appreciate the honest look at that and helping us to kind of understand these drivers. Thanks a lot.
You're welcome.
I guess my only issue was, I know we mentioned the technical committee when we were meeting with the other staff. I know that was our elected officials, and that was very important to them. Have we sent it to the city halls, or are we sending it directly to, how are they getting that information?
I believe they were sent to all the city managers.
Okay.
Yeah. Is that correct? The Highline Forum. Yeah.
Gotcha.
the communities within the Highline Forum.
Okay.
All right, so our next public workshop is scheduled for June 9th, and that's going to be at the Cedarhurst Elementary School.
At where?
Cedarhurst Elementary School on June 9th. We just kind of narrowed down that date recently. Last time we had our meeting south of the airport. This time we decided to move it north of the airport to Cedarhurst. And we do hope that a few of the commissioners can attend that meeting.
And that's in the evening?
That is in the evening. I believe we're scheduled for 6:30. Is that correct? 6:30.
6:30, okay.
To begin with, yeah. And I thank you for your time today. If there's any more questions, we have to answer them.
Are there any questions? No? Very good. Thank you very much. We do have 5 people who have signed up to provide public testimony, and we welcome that. It's one of the reasons why we're here today. Everyone will have 3 minutes to present their views, and I'd like to ask that when you do present your views, and I see Jenny running up here, so maybe we have more than 5, to please give us your name and your address or any affiliation of an organization with which you might be affiliated. Okay, we have a few more. I will read off the person who is first and then also the person who will follow so that we can move through this in an organized way. The first person who will be presenting is Stuart Jenner, and Dan Caldwell will follow Stuart. Mr. Jenner?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I expected to be second, so this is a little surprise, but thank you so much, and thank you for your questions, especially Tom. I appreciated your question there. I attended part of the Part 150 workshop. I was also juggling getting children to daycare, to dinner, to basketball, and to piano. So I was kind of in and out. A few comments, though. The first is I felt like it was a well-run workshop and helpful in many ways. A few things to work on. The first is representation by the City of Seattle. There are a lot of people from South Park, Squire Park, Beacon Hill, Capitol Hill, the Arboretum, and West Seattle who are impacted by airport noise. And I would suggest that some people from the City of Seattle be included in the Technical Review Committee and be on the city manager lists. Several months ago, I looked at the distribution of noise complaints, and there are actually more people from South Park who complained to the Port Noise Hotline than there are from Normandy Park. A second issue is the issue of the translation of what people say to what gets recorded. And I looked at the notes from Group 14 that were included in the handout that's at the back, and also from Group 15. A very interesting person in Group 15 is Group 15, Chestine Edgar, a former employee of Boeing who worked on the modeling for the planes and the noise contours associated with the engines and aircraft combinations. So her work directly is feeding into the integrated noise model that is a big part of determining the DNL contour maps. When I first heard her idea, I thought, you know, this lady is kind of out there. And then she talked about her background and talked about things more in depth, and I wanted to make sure that her comment got included because I didn't really see that reflected in the summary comments. What she said is that we should be looking at the impact of the noise and shaking on the fill in the third runway embankment and on the retaining wall. Her question is whether the fill and the wall transmit that, kind of like a loudspeaker transmits noise through vibration as well. Fill is, by definition, somewhat loose, and so even when it's compacted, it may vibrate and translate that more. This is a very different kind of noise impact than we think of. It's an indirect noise impact, but there are major implications, obviously, for the strength of the retaining wall, the duration of it. And the bigger issue here is how does as whether the people who were recording the conversations got the full gist. I felt like they got a lot of the comments, but there may have been some outlier comments that didn't really fit into the paradigm of noise related to Part 150. A related issue in my group was that there was a gentleman who lives 2 blocks away from Mountain Rainier High School who reported that for the first time he had tasted fuel in the air several times. And this is a concern to me because of the children who are going to Mount Rainier. The suggestion would be that you either have a separate study related to air quality or look at some of those issues. Futures and planning obviously is a really big thing. Final thing, several people and I wrote up comments. One source of comments in Part 150 is the spoken comments. Another is their extensive written comments. We asked for written feedback within 30 days. So far haven't received it. Hopefully we will. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We'll next hear from Mr. Dan Caldwell and then Ms. Arlene Brown.
Thank you. I'm Dan Caldwell, and I'm very glad to see you here in this area here. Well, I won't get that heavily, but it's very important that you visit the community. All you know is you should read my text to cut down the time on it, otherwise I get too windy. I am very concerned that the current Port 150 noise study is another reinvention of the wheel that is being paid for by the King County taxpayers. The previous Port Commission and management were heavily criticized by taxpayers and by the legislature via the state auditor for excessive spending, up to several $1 billion on the third runway. Seattle Times article dated March 5th, 2010 indicates the FAA and not the taxpayers are paying for a similar study for Payne Field for Horizon Airlines and Allegiant Air. FAA reports over 900 comments have been received. Why isn't the FAA paying for this Part 150 study? Your 150 study. And if the port is paying for a study, would it not be better to instead build a noise-reducing fence along the west edge of the third runway and build a hush house to reduce noise complaints? To carry this point one step further, the state audits indicate that the port has only two primary airline customers, United and Alaska. The rest are not considered primary. The CFO of United has indicated to Wall Street that United needs to be taken over. This was in a separate Wall Street report. There is no need for a third runway on a two-customer airport. The runway was a bad business decision made by the previous administration. Now, I want to emphasize, that was the previous administration. The other runway and the sewage holding pond tie up the only available space for additional terminals, such as Southwest and other expansions. They could have gone on the west side of the airport, and that would reduce part of your 150 complaints right there. You are the only port in the state paying for an international airport with absolutely no financial help from any other county. Perhaps you could take a hard look at your so-called lobbyists in Olympia. I've tangled them in the past. Why is the commission having to do this? Why is the lobby not taking care of it and working better for your benefit? Some years back, the legislature authorized another airport, which logically would be placed under your jurisdiction. Dan Caldwell.
Thank you, Mr. Caldwell. I'll hear from Ms. Brown, Arlene Brown, and then from Jim Jollimore.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm Arlene Brown. And I'd like to request that you set up an email system that people can choose the topics to be sent emails on, so that it could be limited to like Part 150 list or only airport noise or something like that, so that I don't have to read about barges and restaurant openings, because I missed both this notice as well as the last public workshop. And I'd like to suggest you put the meetings section in Highline Times, actually have the meetings listed there as well, rather than relying on maybe an advertisement somewhere in the newspaper, in case there's people like me that work overtime all the time and you just take a quick look at the meetings. At the Part 150 workshop, I was there the whole time, and I was amazed at the number of people who rated health as one of their top issues. And someday the European health studies, which right now are just incredible, some of the ones in Germany and some places like that, will force us to make the 65 DNL approach completely obsolete. And then we're going to have to deal with that liability when we start looking at those studies. And so I do thank you that at least you're going to be looking at the single event noise, and ask you to make sure you also look at the ground noise, because the transponders turn off and hit the ground. And we definitely have more ground noise because of the change in taxi approach. Normandy Park has more events as well as more noise because we had no noise before. So it's really easy to know when you go from no noise to not being able to sleep, that the noise contours that are shrinking have no pertinence to people's real lives. So I would ask you to look real hard at that. And I can tell from your questions that you're aware that DNL has some drawbacks. And since I haven't got the bell yet, I did want to say, just in case, that I found it ironic that some people perceive that we got more information and we learned from each other with our small groups at the workshop, because I actually felt we got a lot less, because we narrowed down to the top 3 questions, which tended to have a lot of overlap. And so that's what you tended to hear about, as opposed to all the miscellaneous stuff. Like there's a megaphone effect because there's a tall fence on a street that's the south end that now directs all the noise into Normandy Park that wasn't there, and there's a new housing development. And before we've had airplanes divert, because when we were having the real heavy rains, there was some soil that was actually starting to do little mini landslides, and so we have to take into account the way we have to change operations, because the soil really does start sliding, and you can see it, and you can feel the noise through the ground, because this was a liquefaction zone, and basically it was Bow Lake, and we have the deepest bog is what we basically built on over at the airport, and that completely changes how noise happens. So thank you very much.
Thank you very
Appreciate
much.
it.
We'll next hear from Mr. Jollymore and then Mr. John Cortez.
My name is Jim Jollymore. I live in Des Moines, directly underneath the flight pattern of the 3rd runway. I'd like to thank you for this opportunity to speak. It's good to see some of these faces that I voted for in the last election. But my comment is, and it directly affects the Port of Seattle, and that is that I think it's a foregone conclusion that we need more than one commercial airport in the greater Puget Sound area. My opinion is we need at least 2 more immediately, perhaps in the Everett area and another one down in Olympia. And this would alleviate some of the problems we're having with all the compactness of the noise we get in this one little area. We've got many people coming from miles to come to this airport, and in effect, they're not contributing to the social aspect of the airport, which is the noise. I mean, if people enjoy flight, I enjoy flight, and but we all should share in the detriments of flight. And the other comment I have is in regard to some of the noise programs. I feel as though we've done a lot for people, particularly those that are quite affected, such as directly underneath the flight path. But I think we could do more. And one suggestion I had at the previous workshop was that we provide central air conditioning in the homes that are directly underneath the flight pattern. And that would include the Des Moines and part of the Burien area and the South Park area. And that wouldn't be too much to ask. It'd be probably be $4,000 or $5,000 a home, but at least that way in the summertime, when you do have to open the windows to get a night's sleep, it would alleviate that problem. You could keep the windows closed and you could get some sleep. Also, not everybody works 9 to 5 shift. There are many people in the area, particularly where we're going to a service industry, that work 24 hours a day, and so they need to sleep during the day. So just shifting the flight patterns or the flight times of the airplanes really isn't as effective as it may have been in the past. And another thing we could investigate is perhaps more sound insulation in regard to roofing materials and sidewall insulation. I know these were investigated in the past and they were dismissed as, well, not as effective as extra insulation in the attic or the windows. But I think it's time to take it one step beyond, because as the chart has shown, air travel is the way of the future, and it's going to do nothing but increase, particularly as the economy gets better.
Thank you, Mr. Jordan.
Well, I thank you again for the opportunity to speak to you, and have a good day.
Thank you very much. We'll now hear from Mr. John Cortez and then Ms. Clark Brandt.
Thank you. My name is John Cortez, and I am the pastor of the Bryant Free Methodist Church, which is very close to the runway on the northwest corner. And I'm speaking here today because I feel that there may have been a certain amount of oversight regarding the needs of the church community. In the 150 study, I was at the meeting, and churches are designated as part of the program, but there really wasn't any noise reduction applied for this church building, and I would assume that would fall for other churches as well. The Bryant Free Methodist Church has been there for 104 years. It's a significant part of the community. In fact, we lost a portion of our community with the third runway, and we've been adjusting and dealing with that. But I can see that this is a real issue that is only going to get worse, and as the previous speaker mentioned, summertime is when the real problems begin. There may be a perception that churches only meet on Sunday, and so it's not that big a deal. I know, as a pastor, I only work 1 hour a week, right? So I wanted to make it a point to say that we have meetings and classes every day. We have meetings and classes in the evenings. There's a lot of activity that goes on there, and it's important. And I would just like there to be some consideration for this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now hear from Clark Brandt and then Stuart Creighton.
My name is Clark Brandt, 19242 Edgecliff Drive, Southwest Normandy Park. I'm a member of the City Council. I'm a retired airline captain. I've flown out of the airport for many years. And most important, I am a resident of Normandy Park. I am affected by the noise from your operations. And I recognize that the airport operation is an economic engine for this entire region. But you need to operate it with the respect of the communities around you as far as the noise. There's a few issues that I went to your previous workshop at Mount Rainier High School. One of them, I think an easy solution for you to fix would be to put a fence along the western wall of the airport, or shrubs. You cut down a lot of trees, and the noise in Normandy Park increased dramatically as soon as you took the trees down to start construction. Another one would be a hush house. It's been on your 150 studies for, I think, 2 other previous times, and you haven't done it yet. You need to do these things to become a good neighbor. But my main point today I want to make to you is the nighttime operations. Most developed countries in the world do not allow the operations that we allow in this country. They come over here and take advantage of us and schedule flights that will arrive at a hub in their countries, particularly in Asia. We don't allow those operations to be restricted in this country. The federal government has preempted this by law, by federal code. You have no control over restricting nighttime operations. And I think we're just a little bit too liberal in that regard in this country. It happens during the core sleep hours. You try getting woken up at 2 o'clock in the morning by somebody taking off in the summertime when it's, to me, I think that's the worst times in the summer when your windows are open, the temperatures are high, passenger loads are high, and the airplanes are carrying more fuel because of the higher temperatures, and they're just crackling their way out of this airport. You can hear it. It wakes you up. Once you've been woken up out of core sleep, you'll never get that core sleep the rest of the night. You may eventually get back to bed, but it's going to affect you mentally and physically over your lifetime. And that's something that residents of Normandy Park have to deal with, especially in the summertime when we keep our windows open. The Port of Seattle has the legal resources. You have probably the largest lobbyist organization in the state of Washington. And I think if you want to put the white hat on, I think you should proactively do the study that's necessary to get local control over nighttime operations so that you can either, encourage people not to do them or make them a little bit more expensive that they would think twice about doing it, or some other control that you could get locally. It requires a major study, and that was put in the federal code to discourage you from doing that. It's so hard to do it. You could also use your legal resources or your lobbying organization to begin the process to amend the federal code to bring nighttime operations during core sleep hours back to the local airport operators. And that would allow you to become a good neighbor to the communities that you're supporting around us. We'd really appreciate it if you would take that step and understand the nighttime operations, how these events really affect us. And thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Stuart Creighton, and then Chaz Talbot.
Hello. Stuart Creighton, Regional Commission, Airport Affairs, 18926 Edgecliff Drive, Southwest, here in Normandy Park. I have an unfortunate message for you. Your Part 150 process is really a sham, and here's the reason why. Our community is talking with Arlene Brown and their subcontractors at these public meetings every 3 to 4 months. When we made comment at the last public meeting at Marina High School, I took time to go back and reread the scope of work. It says that Arlene Brown will address our comments at the end of the process. So in the final report, whatever comment anybody makes over the next 2 years is only going to get addressed in the end report. That's not really what you call consultation or meeting with the public or doing a public workshop. If you simply allow people to come in, sit in a small meeting room, say a few things, take those comments, fly away 2,000 miles away to Cincinnati, do whatever you're going to do, come back in 3 or 4 months, spend an evening listening again, and then fly off. The only people that we have any access to, as far as we could see, are the Port Commission. And you're not, if you excuse it, you're not involved in the Part 150 process. You're not hands-on. The airport staff is hands-on. They're working with Arlene Brown. There's no connection between what we say to you, what we say to Arlene Brown, and what the airport staff hears. It's kind of like having a heated argument with an empty chair. We're not getting anywhere with this deal. None of what we say, apparently, is going anywhere except into the final report. That's not the kind of process we're looking for. When the Part 150 process says noise reduction, noise mitigation, land use, and compatibility as the three primary efforts of a Part 150. How do you do anything about noise reduction and noise mitigation when they're studying that noise 2,000 miles away and they're not even here to listen to it, to know what it is, or to know how to deal with it? It doesn't make any sense. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Talbot. And then following Mr. Talbot will be Mr. McEvoy, or Sean McEvoy, Councilmember McEvoy.
I'm thinking, that was a little too close, wasn't it? I'm Chaz Talbot. I'm speaking in my personal capacity, but in the interests of disclosure, I should tell you that I am a part-time consultant for the Regional Commission on Airport Affairs, and my views as a person are very much influenced by the work I've been doing for the last some number of years. I live in Seattle, in Columbia City, which is a noise-impacted neighborhood, which will get no benefit from anything you people do here, unless you're fortunate enough to have changes in flight procedures that the FAA will recognize as also benefiting the people within the new 65 DNL contour. I want to make 2 points, but having listened to Pastor Cortez, I think I need to make 3 points. I sympathize entirely with him on the matter of noise in church. I've been president of a Unitarian congregation on the other side of the hill, and I'm active in my congregation in Seattle, and all the churches need to be taken into account in this study. There doesn't seem to be any consideration for that, and that opens up a larger question of other special uses in the community that are also not at the table at this point. And the one that Mr. Creighton and I have been discussing back and forth is the schools, the public schools. The present metrics that Landerman Brown are proposing to use and Mr. Shepard and his staff are proposing to use do not, repeat, not include the 45 LEQ metric that was designated as the marker for successful noise insulation in the Highline School District's multiple buildings being redone, as you know, under a memorandum of understanding where the Port Commission is contributing towards some of the costs. That needs to be factored in. The problems of the schools, the problems of the churches, the problems of the nursing homes, medical care facilities need to get factored in, and they need to get in early. That's my subsidiary point. My major point, however, is the question of the planning horizon. While it is true, and I'm glad to hear Mr. Shepard say this, that forecasting traffic projections for airports is, quote, more of an art than of a science, with which I agree, but never seems to be the case if we're talking about expansion, in which case we predict operations for 25 years out to the nearest 1,000. Yes, it's an art, but all life is art, and there's less of a problem to it than you might think. Aircraft types, engine types, are not being cranked out new every year. They're long in gestation. And Landerman Brown is perfectly capable of telling you what the fleet mix at SeaTac is likely to be under 2 or 3 different economic scenarios 25 years out. We know what airplanes are going to get built. Got a pretty good idea which airplanes are going to get flown. And until the communities know how big this airport is going to be operationally, will it go to the 640,000 operations that the Aviation Planning Council suggested that it would in their July 2009 report? Are you prepared to handle 640,000 operations or 600,000? And what will the noise impact be? This would be a good time to get those questions looked at with the aid of Landerman Brown. They've been 60 years in this business. They're proud of their abilities. They had a lot of criticism from people in other parts of the country, but they have got substantial professional assets, if you want to put it that way.
Thank you, Mr. Tillman.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And finally, we'll listen to Councilmember McEvoy from Normandy Park. Welcome, Councilmember.
Thank you, Commissioners. Sean McEvoy, former mayor and current council member, City of Normandy Park, 872 Southwest 174th, Normandy Park. We believe there are many issues to consider in this study. We strongly encourage considering how to find new ways to fund mitigation outside the 65 DNL, deal with run-ups, seriously plan for a hush house, increase altitudes on arrival, and curfews on flights, not only air passenger, but air cargo. Of the many issues, we believe there are three top issues. Setting an appropriate planning horizon. Must look at 10 years into the future. Defining noise from the third runway. How will that be defined accurately? And finally, compliance with existing procedures, dealing with deviations from established flight procedures. There's been a lot said about air passenger decline, but there's been very little said about air cargo increase. And this has to be taken into account. Often these flights occur in the evening and the early morning hours, and they are disturbing to people's health, and it's got to change. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other comments? I know we have, if you want to sign up, we can, but otherwise we'll move on. Is that right? Okay. Okay, we do have a few other people. If you want to comment, you need to sign up in the back. Okay, great. And I would like to recognize a few other elected officials we have with us today. We've already heard from Mr. McEvoy, and thank you for joining us, and Councilmember Bryant. We also have Rose Clark, right here. Rose, thank you for joining us. Deputy Mayor Aburian, and we have Senator Kaiser. Thank you for joining us, Senator. And as we mentioned before, Representative Orwell is here with us as well. So thank you all for joining us. If we have a few other people signing up, is that right, Ginny, or one more? Okay. You did sign up? Ann Phillips.
My name is Dr. Thompson. I live at 65 Southwest 189th Street, Normandy Park. I've had the opportunity to live overseas for a good part of my adult life, in Europe and in Asia. And if you go to Europe, for example, you can take bullet train from Paris to Marseille. From 7 in the morning, you're down on the beach by 9 o'clock or 9:30. You can do the same thing in Japan. When I was there 25 years ago for the first time, we went from Tokyo to Kyoto, which is like an LA to San Francisco run. It took 8 hours. Last time I was there, I almost forgot to get off because it was 2.5 hours on bullet trains. Half the problems that you have with airports can be solved by improving your rail system. In Spain, for example, 2 years ago, they opened up a bullet train between Madrid and Barcelona. At the time, it was 90% air flight between those two cities in terms of transportation. Today, it's over 50% train, and as they add more trains, they expect it to be 90% by train within the next 2 years. We're falling so far behind in this country that there are pockets all over this country that are looking more and more like third world countries. The Chinese are building maglev trains. Spain, which is a fraction of our economy, is spending $80 billion in the same time period over the next few years. The United States is spending $8 billion on rail alone. The answer to half your problems, I believe, is to start thinking that you don't need airports nearly as much as you think, certainly not for regional things. There is absolutely no reason to have flights between Seattle, Portland, Vancouver, even Denver and Salt Lake City and areas like that if you had a properly run bullet train system, whether it's a TJV or a Shinkansen or any of those. They are so superior, it's not even mentionable. I mean, a train compared to a plane. And I just like you to start thinking a bit outside the box, although it's not outside the box for the rest of the world, it only seems to be outside of the box for the United States. And I believe that you really can solve half your problems. Since I haven't heard the bell either, I also must mention that, capacity as a healthcare worker, that the idea of having an airport, the medical implications, the increase in respiratory problems of all nature, as I'm sure you're aware, are greatly aggravated by having airports in heavily urban areas. And I don't see anybody considering just how much of an impact and money it costs and work time lost and impacts on children and people with, a variety of respiratory issues by having airports located in areas like this. And I think that's something that needs to be figured into your grand scheme of things. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we do have Ann Phillips, and I apologize for not calling you sooner. And also want to mention that Mayor Hadley from Normandy Park is also with us, so welcome, Mary Hadley.
Yes, I am Ann Phillips, and I live up there on the bluff at 17600 Sylvester Road. And I have a bed and breakfast that's advertised as being amazingly quiet and peaceful, and it is as long as the planes are taking off that way. But the minute they reverse direction and take off from south to north, it gets ridiculously noisy. And I may be crazy, but I really appreciate the opportunity to ask this question. Do planes make more noise when they're taking off in that direction than in that direction? Has anybody tried to correlate the reports of noise according to the direction of the takeoff? That's my question. Because in my little group at the workshops a month ago, other people seem to agree with that comment. They said, yes, I've noticed that too. So I think it may be something to look into. I don't know. I can't imagine why, but thank you.
Thank you very much.
Sorry.
All right. Unless there's anyone else who has signed up, that will conclude our public testimony on this issue. And I appreciate all of you coming out and helping us with this process. And again, there are going to be many more opportunities to do so before we're finished with it. And with that, we'll close this item of business and move on. And I will now turn this back over to Dan Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. President. Returning back to the action items under Section 6. First item is 6A, which is second reading, final passage of resolution number 3635, providing the CEO with the authority to submit an application to reorganize general purpose foreign trade zone number 5 under the alternative site framework, and for the CEO to implement the program through agreements with prospective companies that desire to utilize the port's foreign trade zone after prior notification to the Commission. And here to make the presentation are Linda Sturck and Tom Tanaka.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. We're here again. This is the second reading on a resolution, which is part of our application to submit to change our foreign trade zone from a general purpose zone to an alternative site framework. We had you had a few questions at your last at the first meeting, and so we thought we might try and answer a couple of those to the extent we can. So, Linda, do you want to go ahead?
Okay, hopefully you can hear me okay. And so some of those questions were if there were any companies or industries that we might target in the future for the foreign trade zone business in this new framework. And certainly the targets that we would have would be those importers who are paying duty now and frequently filing their customs entries and look to show the advantage that they might consider with a foreign trade zone where they can reduce the number of transactions or might benefit from a reduced duty arrangement, especially if they had any plans to manipulate or enhance their product before they made entry with customs. And also just by the ability to defer entry, importers retain that cash for themselves, and there's some financial benefit there. And if they choose to enhance their product and re-export it, they would avoid the import duty altogether. So those would be the first targets, and then we would expand from there. Certainly we would look to cooperate with our real estate division to try and promote through their property portfolio any benefits that they can offer, with the foreign trade zone being an additional feature. In addition, there was a question regarding if we increase the foreign trade zone demand, should we consider how we allocate this limited resource? Well, right now, we would be thrilled if we could consume at least half the acreage we have available for the foreign trade zone. I think it's going to be a ways off before we get in that position of demand being greater than the supply of acreage. One of the features, though, in this alternative site framework is that we can actually expand our acreage from what it is today up to 2,000 acres. So we do have a lot of room before we would get in that situation of constraint. And another question was, do we want this to use this as a tool to market the attractiveness of our other properties? And certainly we would. We do have other port properties that are outside the seaport portfolio in the real estate, and where they might serve the purpose to be a warehouse or distribution type operation, those kinds of properties would lend themselves to a foreign trade zone benefit, and we would look to coordinate with our real estate division on those opportunities. And next, just would we use this as a tool to market, I was reading the same question. And just a question about if there's a policy issue involved about how we utilize our foreign trade zone. And at this point, since we're just ramping up with this new alternative site framework, it's really just a process change and efficiency that we can create in how we administer those customer requests to utilize our authority. And at these early stages, we don't have any, policy questions for you, but as we ramp up this program, we actually handle and administer our first customer in this new framework. If something like that surfaces, certainly we would come forth again and get your thoughts and ideas about that. Were there any other questions?
Are there any other questions?
No, I'll just say thank you very much, because I think a lot of those questions were mine. Thanks for addressing those. One of the things I guess I'd like to see, and I do agree that the market is certainly not presently there to consume the acreage that we have available. I'd like us to backstop or kind of restrict the acreage that we're willing to make available currently under the current policies, to such that we don't lose in the future the opportunity to come back and reevaluate it. The last thing I would want is for some use to come along where we allocate 3/4 of our acreage or some significant part, and then lose the opportunity to really market an opportunity that might be more strategic in terms of economic development. So I'll just throw that out there. I think in terms we need to know when we're going to come back and really address this, and we don't want to lose the flexibility to be very strategic about economic growth regionally. So just some of that.
Okay, so perhaps down the road we can propose a threshold of which we would come back as we see, the use of that authority grow.
Right, I would say something in the tune of 1/3 available now, be consumed, and then by the time we hit that, we need to really have some policy.
Okay.
Commissioner Hall.
Yeah, now, will the alternative site framework put restraints on, currently, what is it? It's 1,200 acres?
Well, we currently have about 1,390 acres available.
Okay. So will that still be kind of our limit even under an alternative site framework?
No, it increases to 2,000 acres. So 1,390 acres represents properties that we actually own ourselves.
Okay.
And under the alternative site framework, we're not bound just to those properties. I mean, we can designate anywhere within our service area, which is Keene County.
Such as the community that we're in now, huh?
That is correct.
All right, great.
Are there any other questions or comments? How would you like to proceed?
Okay. Just move, okay. I move that we pass resolution 3635, second reading and to final passage. Application to recognize general purpose foreign trade zone number 5 under alternative site framework.
I'd like to second that.
It's been moved by Commissioner
Holland and seconded by Commissioner Albro that we move on item 6A. Is there any additional discussion or questions? No, hearing none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, the same sign. The motion carries. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Thomas.
Next, we have item 6B, which is authorization for the Chief Executive Officer to authorize up to $5,440,000 of tenant reimbursement associated with the build-out of an airline lounge on the roof of the South Satellite at the airport, and to execute a tenant reimbursement agreement with Delta Airlines under the airport's AV2 policy. And here to make the presentation are James Jennings and Janet Shearer.
Good afternoon, President Bryant, Commissioners, Mr. Thomas. With me today is Janet Shearer, Capital Project Manager, and I'm James Jennings, Property Manager, Aviation Business Development. As he just said, we're here today to request authorization for $5.44 million of budget associated with the build-out of Delta's Sky Club Lounge at the South Satellite. Additionally, we're requesting Commission authorize staff to finalize negotiations and execute a tenant reimbursement agreement with Delta Airlines. This presentation is a follow-up to our briefing on February 2nd, where Mike Gael, Caldwell, and I came and gave you an overview of Delta's growth plans and the issues we're dealing with at the South Satellite, and specifically Delta's request to build this club on the roof of the South Satellite. We're very excited about Delta's growth, and actually since our briefing presentation, Delta's additionally submitted a request to the Department of Transportation for an additional route from Seattle to Haneda, and I'm sure you're all well aware of that as their top priority. The point being, this is another indication that Delta's commitment to Seattle is an Asian gateway, and how this particular project is critical to them and their operation. We also have received a letter of support, hopefully it's been submitted to Commission in support of this project, and hopefully part of the record. So in response to Delta's project schedule, the Port has established this $5.44 million of budget, not to exceed budget, based on Delta's 90% cost estimate. This design cost is inclusive of some contingencies, negotiated risk, and port overhead expected to be incurred during the design and construction process. The reimbursement amount basically is not fixed yet for a couple reasons. The design isn't completed, and Delta wants their construction management group that they've hired to review the cost proposal before they actually sign an agreement with us. So the reason we're here today is primarily because we committed to you to come back and review this project prior to the asbestos award, which you've already authorized on February 9th. So the other issue is the final project cost actually won't be completely resolved until the project's completed, per our policy AV-2. There's always an opportunity. We all know how construction projects go with change orders and whatnot. The actual amount won't be finalized until the construction is completed. Janet Shearer's here with me. She's going to briefly just touch on where we are with the project, and then we're going to get to some of the questions you asked us during your briefing.
Thank you, James. Thank you. Just a quick update on the status of the RMM project. That project is out for bid right now. It's being publicly advertised, and the bids are due on April 6th. Our intent, as James mentioned, is to award that pending approval of this reimbursement agreement. As far as Delta's tenant project goes, they are developing their final construction documents. And what they're doing right now is incorporating some port changes that we asked for, including an HVAC unit that will serve both this new lounge and improve conditions for the existing BA lounge. We also requested that Delta enclose this mechanical space, and this did increase the overall square footage of the project. And we asked for some modifications to the elevator that Delta is proposing to install to serve concourse to this new lounge level, so that it would also serve the existing British Airways lounge as well. We are cautiously optimistic that our abatement work will end just as soon as Delta is getting ready to start their work, and that's part of the reason that we're here today asking for this, to just kind of keep them on track with that. They have an anticipated construction duration of 200 days.
So just a note on that, in Delta's letter, their desired schedule is actually to have this project completed by the end of this year, with the port responsible for the asbestos abatement. We're working as hard as we can to mitigate, any time delays, again, which is motivating us to come to you probably a little more sooner than we would in a traditional sense. So just in regards to follow up some of the questions we had during the briefing, Commissioner Creighton actually touched on the rental rate, and I just wanted to make sure that we had some clarity on that issue. The capital costs that are incurred as part of this project go into the airline rate base, and I think actually Commissioner Albro talked about it as a sealed system very clearly. It's a cost recovery model, and so all the capital costs are distributed to all the carriers. So we actually have a CP impact that's been calculated as 2 cents. And again, this project, the majority of this project was already in the plan of finance and the airport's budget plan. Additionally, to benefit the airlines, realizing the CPE is going to go up, there is actually a positive impact on the terminal rental rates. And so when we reviewed this with the airlines at AAAC, they realized that there was a cost impact, but there also was a rental rate impact. So the increasing of the terminal square footage actually is going to bring down the terminal rental rates a couple percent, or at least a percentage point or so. The other question that came up during the process was a little bit more detail on a tenant reimbursement process, so I'm prepared to give you a little bit more on that. We included a copy of the policy in the memo, and I just want to give you a chance to ask questions, but give you a quick overview if I could. So the RCW 14.08.120 actually provides the port the authority to reimburse tenants in their leased areas. Resolution 3605, Section 2.4 delegates $200,000 to the CEO and establishes the need for a procedure. So Aviation Division established a procedure in May of last year, and it's AV-2. And so we're basically following this policy, really the first opportunity for a major project to follow along this policy. In general terms, it basically means the port's responsible for some core elements of the tenant project, the shell, the infrastructure, the utility supplies, as well as what you would see in kind of the private sector as kind of a tenant allowance. We provide enough money to bring the space up to vanilla shell. And the reason we do that is because today, we can't collect rent on this space yet, so they're contributing this capital so that we can collect rent. So it doesn't make sense to charge them full rent and charge them full boat for the capital costs. So we chip in that money, and that's really what this tenant reimbursement is about. So just a quick overview on how the process flows. Again, this is a larger project. We've used this vehicle on several smaller projects, but the tenant makes a request and provides the port a scope. We determine whether it's eligible for a reimbursement or not. And the way we determine that essentially is basically if they're creating a port asset for the first time, just like I said, we have some stake in the capital investment, and so we provide this reimbursement. So once we determine there's eligibility, we provide conceptual approval to the tenant so they can initiate a design process. They initiate a design process and basically bring it to a level where they can do a cost estimate. We do a review and a negotiation of the cost estimate and determine kind of cost sharing essentially between the port and the tenant, whether it's an engineer's estimate by us or whether it's an actual architect's estimate by the tenant. We essentially come to that agreement. We authorize or request the necessary authorizations. Obviously, if it's above $200,000, we come to commission and ask you for that authorization. And we add the premises to the lease. We sign the tenant reimbursement agreement, and then the tenant can start construction. So in a nutshell, and actually there's one more point, at the end of the project, once it's completed, again, because there are changes in construction, they have an opportunity to bring a case to us to say, hey, there were these unforeseen conditions or these change orders that you requested port, or, and so we believe we need more money. And so that's outlined in the policy, but essentially it's really at the port's sole discretion. So just to conclude, following your review of this authorization request, Delta is going to finalize their review of the cost estimate. They've been waiting to get a construction manager on board. Again, they weren't quite ready to sign the agreement yet because they haven't fully vetted the cost estimate with their own folks. Yet they want us to move forward on the asbestos abatement, and so we're in this agreement. So they will complete design, and essentially we'll finalize what the tenant reimbursement negotiation and the amount is. An MII will be sent out to the airlines. We'll execute, both parties will sign the tenant reimbursement agreement. We'll add the premises per the lease responsibilities, and Delta will be authorized to begin construction. So in a nutshell, that's it. In closing, we're excited about Delta's commitment to construct the Sky Club Lounge, and we feel it's a great indicator of Delta's commitment to international passenger growth in Seattle. With that, I'll open it up to questions.
Thank you very much. Commissioner, if I may, before we go into questions, Delta Airlines, as you referenced, has submitted a letter to the Commission, and they asked that I read it into the record. I'm going to submit the whole thing into the record and not read it all, but there is a part of this that I would like to make available to those who haven't had a chance to read the letter, because it really does demonstrate its commitment to SeaTac by Delta. Delta will add new nonstop service this summer to Osaka, Japan, Beijing, China, and additional service to Amsterdam, Netherlands. We also thank you for your support of Delta's request for additional service from Seattle to Tokyo via the Tokyo International Airport in Haneda. Delta is currently undergoing many facility enhancements to accommodate our larger passenger base. These facility enhancements include the construction of a new rooftop Sky Club on the South Satellite and modifications to the ticketing lobby. So we do want to thank Delta for their expansion and their commitment to SeaTac. Commissioner.
Thank you, President Bryant, and actually my question dovetails nicely with this letter. Well, first I wanted to thank you, James and Janet, for following up on the questions. That additional detail is very helpful, so thank you for that. And I think this item, as Commissioner Bryant mentioned, represents very good news, and that it's part and parcel to Delta's planned expansion is SeaTac, and their designation of SeaTac as their West Coast hub to Asia. And in the portion of the letter that President Bryant just read, it talks about the Port of Seattle's support for the Haneda route. And just curious, what form has our support taken? Has it been letter writing? And what additionally can we do? I know it's more of a Japanese government issue, but are there ways we can put our thumb on the scale for Seattle, such as working through former Ambassador Tom Foley and whatnot?
I know there's been an extensive process, and I'm not in a position to represent that well, so we'll let Mark represent that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. And you raise a subject very important to us right at the moment, one we're very deeply involved in. So we have certainly gone through the formal docket process that the Department of Transportation set up to offer our formal comments. That process ended, I'm going to say, a week and a half or 2 weeks ago. There is then a subsequent process, or there's a subsequent window that remains open for additional public input. So in collaboration with Delta and with Alaska Airlines, which is an important marketing partner with Delta, we were able to request and get letters from the governor and the mayor of Seattle and the Seattle City Council and the county executive, et cetera, to communicate the importance of this route to the economy and the businesses of the local area. Since then, we are continuing that work and actually are getting expressions of interest from Idaho and Oregon and other parts of eastern Washington, et cetera. A major message being that the circuity, it's a word I didn't know existed until this process went through. I guess it is similar to circuitousness, but anyway, the circuity of the route through Seattle is much less than most of the other routes that are involved. So in other words, if you're flying from LA, it's a single route from LA, but if you're flying anyplace else, you're mostly flying south to LA in order to fly north. Whereas with Seattle, it actually is a much more natural, direct process to use Seattle as a gateway from all over the western U.S. That's a major part of our message, which counteracts the message that some of Delta's competitors have put out that SeaTac represents a very small origin and destination market.
So, Mark, at the beginning you mentioned the Department Department of Transportation, so the decision on the route to Haneda will ultimately, or the final decision will be made by the
Secretary of Transportation.
and
That's right.
not the Japanese authorities.
No, that's right. Under the U.S. bilateral treaty with Japan, there was put in there the U.S. right to establish 4 routes. The Japanese have right to establish a certain number of routes, and of course Japan has relationships with other countries as well. So there are 4 routes. There's 11 cities, or 11 routes from probably 9 cities that have been proposed, and Delta proposed flights from 4 cities, and they identified SeaTac as being the highest of their priorities.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
I just wanted to make sure I understood the timing of signing our agreement with Delta, and I can understand that making sure that this really pencils, and when we begin our abatement project.
Yeah.
Are we in the same boat? We're going to get them to sign the deal before we begin abating, or do we feel like we need to be leading this a little bit?
Well, basically, we are here today asking for a not-to-exceed amount. And so we're very comfortable that our commitment, the port's commitment, is not going to be, beyond that, obviously. Actually, we're hoping the negotiations will be favorable and we'll actually be able to bring it in significantly below that. But in essence, the reason we're here today versus waiting until we had better construction, actually possibly even bids from them, it's really to respond to Delta's desire for construction to begin sooner than later. And so our intent, our full intent, is with the Commission's authorization of this not-to-exceed amount, that we will be able to move forward on the awarding the contract for the remediation. And that's what we committed to do, is to come bring you the broader project so you understood it before we actually did any awarding.
Right, but I appreciate that, James. My question really is, do we begin abating before we have a deal with them?
Theoretically, yeah.
And what are we doing to kind of manage that? Because we really don't want to abate if we don't have a deal.
Sure, yeah.
I'm sure I'm not the only one to think that way.
No, we've actually we've walked through this process many times. It's going to take obviously some time for us to get the abatement ramped up, and we've been working with them to get their review of the 90% construction estimate as quickly as possible. They just recently brought their construction manager on board, so the intention is in the next month, or it's probably 4 weeks, to engage them once they have their review, to get a tenant reimbursement agreement signed before they start construction, worst case, and hopefully before we're well underway. I'm sure our construction and their construction will parallel to some degree. So it's not like we will be completely done with the asbestos remediation before we have an agreement signed. It's just we need to begin the project and begin mobilization so that we at least aren't slowing them down too much.
And I want to say that I'm thrilled that Delta's making this commitment to our market, and I'm sure, I fly at Delta regularly.
Yeah.
So that's all great, but I'm really trying to understand. They want us to hurry up, get all this stuff lined up, and they're going to wait and see if it pencils before they sign it. And I don't know, it just seems to me like what's our hurry if we don't have them willing to sign? And how much, and then asbestos abatement project, if I recall, is about 1.9 million?
7.5, I believe.
1.75. Yeah. So this is not trivial. It's not trivial at all.
Absolutely. Yeah, and just to clarify, I don't think that they're hedging. They before the numbers finalized. And to be perfectly honest, it's in their best interest, it's in both of our best interests, to have as good of an estimate as possible. They've actually gone doing due diligence to try and get that estimate closely, as close to reality as possible. Obviously, until previously, our tenant reimbursement agreement was a retroactive type of an agreement, and we didn't even have an agreement in place, but we didn't identify those costs until after the project was done, and so you had perfect information to work from. we're, per the audit and per our requirements, are trying to mitigate that risk and at least having an agreement in place before construction begins. But, very honestly, we could continue to wait until the agreement is signed, and that's definitely an option that's available to the commission. When we, basically brought that to our leadership and senior leadership, Mark Reese and company, the direction was, let's establish a not-to-exceed budget we're all comfortable with. Our commitment is limited, and let's move forward in the effort to partner on the scheduling. Again, we have the option to wait, and that's an acceptable response.
I guess I'd have to hear the business case for why we, if we don't do this today, what's the likelihood that Delta doesn't continue in their direction? What are we risking by tabling this at this meeting as opposed to?
It's really it's a tenant a support-tenant relationship issue. Again, from Delta's point of view, they are committing, obviously to build this club. They're committing to add these new routes. They're asking the port to be a little bit flexible on the timing so that they can. Their goal is to get this project, this club open before next summer. They're already going to have to struggle through this summer, and so that's really what they're asking the port, realizing they're fully committed to this project. They have their own funding. They have to pre-fund this project. They've already got authorization. So the odds of them, not moving forward are very, very small. They already have commitments. We've been working in good faith with them for well over a year, and so this is the middle ground that we came to in terms of trying to determine how do we balance our procedure requirements in terms of timing and authorizations and their desire to get construction done in a reasonable amount of time.
And James, if I could just follow up on Commissioner Albro's question, if I understood the presentation correctly, the capital costs and the tenant reimbursement amounts and whatnot will ultimately be incorporated into the rate base, and then whatever we get back from Delta on lease specifically, also will come back to us. But I think the risk would be mitigated in part by going back into the rate base.
Yeah, in terms of the capital costs.
And then, and so do the other airlines have to approve this at all? Or?
Yeah, in fact, and that's a very good point. We've had 2 briefings with the other airlines in regards to this project, and they all recognize, there are occasions where they've utilized the tenant reimbursement process. This is Delta's time, and of course, beyond the capital piece, which they're willing to bear, and they will be voting on this again with the Commission's authorization. That will be one of the next steps, is to put it out to the airline vote. But they're also going to have. They recognize that there's a savings in the terminal rental rates as well. So the airlines have been communicated. They've been supportive in the AAAC meetings. We expect them to support this project. I think that alone speaks to if they're comfortable moving forward, we should be comfortable moving forward as well.
Any other questions? Thank you very much. So how would you like to proceed with this?
President Bryant, I'm happy to move approval of agenda item 6B.
It's been moved by Commissioner Creighton. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Holland. I would like to point out before we vote on this that this project will add about $250,000 in state sales tax, local taxes, and will provide about 100 jobs. Are there any additional questions or comments? Hearing none, all those...
I was just going to say that I'm troubled by the fact that we put ourselves into this kind of timing situation, but I also appreciate Delta's commitment. So I will be voting in favor of this, but it's not a place I'd like to be, and so I would hope that we can persuade our airline partners and others to not put us out so far in our skis, if you will.
Yeah, and I am there as well. So in the future, if we can get more of a commitment up front, that would be a good thing. All right, any other questions or comments? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries unanimously. The next three items are items which are part of our budget, which has already been approved. These are additional authorizations to keep these projects moving. The first is for $203,000. The second is for $2.752, and the third is simply just to move forward for the advertising of bids. Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. President. Next is item 6C, which is authorization for the Chief Executive Officer to increase the authorized amount for the second floor HVAC upgrades at the airport by $203,000 to pay additional in-house and consultant costs to complete the project for a total authorization of $1.7 million. And the presenters are Wayne Grothier and Joe Nessel.
Thank you, and good afternoon, President Bryant, Commissioners, and Mr. Thomas. So the item before you today requests your authorization of a budget increase, $203,000 to a total of $1.7 million for the second floor HVAC upgrade project. This project is currently underway. Completion will enable HMS Host to construct offices in this portion of the original 1949 main terminal building. There are numerous individual elements of the budget increase, but that can be summarized really as two things. One, we need to do a better job of cost estimating, particularly for smaller projects, and second, of monitoring construction costs. For the former, for cost estimating, we've recently begun a port-wide effort to update our cost estimation template with a particular focus on soft costs. As I've discussed with you a couple times earlier this year, soft costs do not scale down well. In some cases, soft costs are essentially fixed and are not proportional to project size. We need to update our cost estimating approach to reflect those realities. For the latter, for monitoring construction costs, we didn't do as good a job as we should have on this project, and that's resulted in a change order total that we should have anticipated earlier, and that is greater than we would have expected at this point in the project. We should have seen that coming earlier. We do believe that the budget increase we are requesting will be sufficient to complete this project. However, it is possible, as we're still working through the change order process, that resolution of outstanding and pending change orders will exceed the new budgeted amounts, including contingency. We are working through those change orders expeditiously and obviously to resolve those equitably, but it is possible that I'd be back before you asking for one more budget increase on the order of tens of thousands of dollars. We expect that we will have that covered. We're not absolutely sure, and that's why I wanted to alert you to that possibility. With that, I'd like to turn to Joe Nessel, our project manager, to give you a bit more detail on the elements of the budget increase, and then we'd be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you. As was explained, the primary area where the cost increase occurred are in the soft costs, or the in-house costs. The construction management and document control in that particular area, which was identified as having the highest cost increase. The one thing that had not been anticipated was the document control system and the things that go into managing that. When the estimate was put together early on in the project, this was an item that was not foreseen. It had got missed and basically underfunded. So this is one of the areas that we're focusing on now to make sure this doesn't happen again. The contract procurement and administration, this was an area that was underestimated. It has a lot to do with the way we recover the costs now and identify things better, and the end result was this was significantly underestimated in the original template, and now we've identified the costs and we need to increase it in this area. The project management, this is something that's been ongoing throughout the entire project, and we have had some contract extension period during design to do some port-requested design changes. We've also had the construction duration be extended by 2 months. Put that all together, and you do see an increase in project management costs. There's also been an increase in the design costs, and these design costs did increase based on port requested changes. One of them came at 90% phase, and this was predominantly to change the routing of the ducts on the roof. It would improve maintenance, keep as much of the roof area accessible, and there were some other interior changes that were done, but it was a better overall design, so we did that. It did slow us down a couple of months. And then there was another design change done for the supports for the ducts. It was requested by maintenance, and we felt it was better, so we went ahead and did that. So that incurred some additional design costs. All of these costs that we have identified, we also have taken into account the actual reduction in the construction bid. We had a 12 to 13% savings. So when you have the additional soft costs that we've identified here, we did have a savings in the construction bid, and the net amount is what we're asking for today, with some money set aside for a contingency for the change order claims. So I'll be available to answer any questions.
Mr. Commissioner.
I always have questions
Albro.
about the construction project. First off, I appreciate the the ownership of the issues, and we do enough of these things, we're going to have problems, no doubt, and we do a lot of them. So this is not meant as criticism, but you said two things that we talked about the estimate. We need to do a better job of estimating, and that's fair. But it also sounds like we need to do a better job of designing, because we, once the project got underway, we decided, we listened to the maintenance guys, and they still need to get access to this roof. We need to reroute the ducting, time out. We're going to drive up our design costs and lower our estimate, but we're going to do something that makes more sense. So what about this project, if we could redo it from the beginning, would we do differently?
In regards to the design wells, what we would do differently is we better estimate it. So I think that we've talked about that and identified it. But from the design standpoint, very often with a renovation project, you go into it with, at the 30% or the earlier design phases with an idea of how to tackle it. Once you get everything in front of you, that's when it came out that, there's a better way to do this, a more efficient way that is going to cost us more time. It's going to cost us more to change the design, but the long term and how everything will fit and will serve the tenants as well as the port, this is a better thing to do. So that's why that design change was done. The one that was done for maintenance was really more of a way to preserve the roof. This project actually went into an area that was a brand new roof. So this was to basically have something that's more watertight, and that was a minor change. The more major one was during the 90%. So yes, a renovation project, very often you go back and say, I think we could have thought this through better, and that's typical of a project. You learn from that, and then hopefully do better the next time through.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? How would you all like to proceed?
I'd like to move approval of CPO's request to increase the amount of authorized for this project by $203,000.
It's been so moved by Commissioner Albro. Is there a second?
I will second Commissioner Albro's.
Seconded by Commissioner Creighton. Any final comments or questions? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same sign. Motion carries. Thank you. Mr. Thomas.
Next is item 6D, which is authorization for the Chief Executive Officer to advertise for construction bids, award the contract, and construct the C1 to C88 baggage handling connection project, and authorize Port Construction Services to self-perform work and issue small works contracts in support of the project at the airport for an additional amount of $2,752,000, bringing the total authorization to $3,032,000. And here to present is Wayne Grothier. Again.
Thank you again. So as Mr. Thomas noted, item before you requests authorization to advertise for bids and award a construction contract for the C1 to C88 baggage conveyor system. This system connects Alaska's C1 system to the North Satellite C88 system so that Alaska Airlines can make efficient use of the North Satellite without needing to modify its check-in area. We are seeking your approval of two steps of the capital project process, both advertising for construction contracts and awarding the construction contract. The reason we are doing that is to save time and ensure that we can complete this project before the end of the year holiday rush, and that's at Alaska Airlines' request, obviously our largest customer at the airport. So for that reason, we are asking for combined authorization. You will note that the budget has increased during the design process. It's increased about 8%, and that's part of going through the design. It's essentially driven by longer conveyor lengths and use of more expensive conveyor sections where we needed to do that, or that's what the design revealed. With that, I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Questions, comments? How would you like to proceed?
If I could, Mr. President.
Sure. Commissioner Creighton.
Wayne, a few years back, we had some cost overruns on our baggage handling system projects, and a lot coming out of 9/11 and having to reconfigure things and then trying to keep ahead of TSA regulations that seem to be constantly changing and being updated. Has the TSA really settled down or determined on sort of a framework or a standard enough that we can be sure that we won't have similar issues going forward? Or?
I don't think I can comment on TSA generally in that regard. I will comment on this specific project. This specific project ties in both of these systems post-screening, so it's not really affected by TSA. It's past screening for both of those, but Mr. Gael will be better qualified to talk about TSA generally.
Thank you, Wayne. Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm Mike Gael, Director of Aviation Operations at CTAC. Commissioner Creighton, Wayne essentially answered your question by saying it's not a screening matrix that we're building here. It's simply a transfer belt from one of the existing systems to another. So there should be no TSA implications involved in that regard.
And there's enough room within our current basement facilities.
There is. It's amazing what the mechanical engineers have been able to do. And
really,
as you're
fitting 2 stories of baggage handling,
that's quite right.
Conveyors into one-story basement.
You're probably aware that over a year ago, Alaska shifted many of its operations from the D concourse to the North Satellite, and they've recently come to us with a plan to move all their operations to the North Satellite. So this is the first step in enabling them to really be able to move forward and expanding the North Satellite and shifting their operations. So it's a key element of that future strategy for them.
Good. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments? We have a first and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, the same sign. The motion carries. Thank you very much. Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. President. Next, we have item 6E, which is authorization for the Chief Executive Officer to advertise for bids and execute a contract for upgrades on the ship's loading systems on towers 2, 3, and 5 at Terminal 86 Grain Facility for a total port capital investment estimated at $2,500,000. This authorization combines 2 steps of the resolution number 3605 process, which is authorization to design and authorization to advertise and execute a contract, into one to expedite a project that has been identified as a safety concern. And here to make the presentation are Scott Pattison and Rod Jackson.
Pardon me for the interruption. Donna's over here tucking in my elbow to ask you to let her know who moved that last motion. She didn't hear it.
I believe it was Commissioner Creighton who moved it, and no?
I'll take the second.
You take the second? Okay. Yeah, Commissioner Creighton and Commissioner Holland.
Thank you. Thank you, President Bryant, Commissioners, and Mr. Thomas. We are here today, as described in our...
Hold on one second. Maybe I got ahead of myself. Did we not move and second that? I was just going off the previous one?
Yeah.
Oh, well, then let's go back and do it right.
So I was
You threw me off there. Okay, so we don't have a motion or a second.
But, Mr. President, I will so move.
All right, Commissioner Creighton has moved. Commissioner Holland has seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, the same sign. And now we have done it correctly. All right, let's move on.
I wasn't sure.
I had it mixed up with the previous one, so go ahead.
Thank you, President Bryant, Commissioners, and Mr. Thomas. We are here today, as described in the Commission memo, to request $2,440,000 to modernize the Terminal 86 grain terminal towers 2, 3, and 5 and components of those towers. The total cost of this project, including past authorizations, would be $2.5 million for the port. Additionally, our tenant, Louis Dreyfus, will furnish equipment at an estimated cost of $419,000. The tenant has also indicated that, subject to its executive approval, it will seek to exercise its next 5-year option to lease Terminal 86 from November of 2010 through November of 2015. A very positive perspective for the Port of Seattle. The lease designates that the tenant is responsible for maintenance and repair of Terminal 86. The port's responsible for damage and destruction. However, the lease is silent on who deals with end-of-life issues when things just plain wear out due to age, despite being well-maintained. That's the situation that we're dealing with on our towers at Terminal 86 at this time. Terminal 86 has 5 towers, and each of those towers has a loading spout and a boom and a bull wheel and other mechanical equipment that's all used to take the grain from the silos and load it into the ships. Terminal 86 went into service in 1969, and that was more than 40 years ago. In 2006 and in 2007, towers number 4 and number 1 failed at the grain terminal. They collapsed and fell off into the holds of the ships. Both towers were repaired by the port under the damage and destruction clause, and Tower 5 actually had a failure earlier, closer to the year 2000, and it had some temporary repairs made, which we've learned from our repairs of Towers 1 and 4, how we can better repair that to restore it to a condition consistent with the other towers. The port and the tenant agree that Towers 2, 3, and 5 are at risk of failure due to their age. Such failures pose risk to life safety, and they also have an adverse financial implication to the port and its tenant by interrupting operations. I'll remind the audience that the port is paid a portion of our revenue from Terminal 86 by grain moving through the terminal. When a spout falls off and operations shut down, that not only harms our tenant, it affects the cash flow of the port as well. Approval of this request would enable the port to undertake improvements to Towers 2, 3, and 5 now, mitigating the risk of yet another tower or spout failure. Our request today for funding is for funding approval of $2,440,000 to include design, permits, construction to complete upgrades on Towers 2, 3, and 5. The scope of this project is consistent with the upgrade work recently completed on Towers 1 and 4, and with your approval today, our Capital Development Division would proceed with final design and preparation of construction documents. Work would be performed in phases to minimize the impact on tenant operations. And at this time, I guess we would open it up for questions.
Are there any questions or comments? Commissioner Creighton.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Scott and Rod. Curious, number one, can this project be done without impacting the operations of the terminal? And then number two, I'm just curious if you have any projections in terms of volume for this coming year.
Both good questions. One of our concerns is that this work be performed between crop years. The crop year is winding down, and production will slow down in August, and then the fall, typically the beginning of October, volume picks back up. So the window for construction under Phase 1 would be in the month of September, when we would shut down the entire terminal operation and go through, complete this work and get it back up and running, targeting back in operation on October 1. So we're trying to do it at a time that minimizes the impact of throughput volume. The grain forecast, the crop year this past year was a very wet crop, and so the quality of the grain is down, particularly corn, and the volume of it is down as well. But the volumes seem to be close to what we had forecast in our budget, and we expect it to rebound again next year, provided the weather is right and the crops do grow. It's a very active facility. We've been very fortunate that Louis Dreyfus has aggressively used the facility to its fullest throughput capacity.
Phase 2 will also be operational, or will take advantage of that in October, September 2011.
Thank you.
Are there any other comments, questions?
I had a question just because so I can imagine what a grain spout is, or boom assembly. But if you could just describe to me, what is a pedal and what is a bull wheel?
I don't know if you're a skier or not, but if you're a skier or if you've ever been on a chairlift, the bottom of the chairlift where the cable goes around and starts back up the hill, that's called a bull wheel, and there's another one at the top. And so you have this boom that's hooked onto the tower, and the spout hangs down from the boom, and the boom would fall over if it wasn't tied back to the top of the tower. So the pendants tie from the tip of the boom back to the top of the tower to keep it from falling down. And then they need to be able to move the spout back and forth to load the hold of the ship. And so it's all hooked up on a thing called a bull wheel, which is kind of like what you'd see at the bottom of a chairlift at a ski area.
Very good. And so, do we imagine, are you guys, have you thought through whether we're going to procure phase 1 and 2 as one contract, or is this two separate contracts?
Two separate contracts. Phase 1 will just, we'll install the tenant-provided equipment and have that complete by October 2010. And for phase 2, we will procure, design, and fabricate the equipment to the bull wheel and strengthen the towers for phase 2, which will also occur by the end of September 2011.
How would you like to proceed?
Mr. President, I will move approval of agenda item 6E.
It's been moved by Commissioner Creighton, seconded by Commissioner Holland. Any final questions or comments? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same sign. The motion carries. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Scott and Rod. Mr. Thomas.
Next is item 6F, authorization for the Chief Executive Officer to proceed with engineering analyses and design, preparation of construction documents, permit acquisition, and project management for the replacement of the fender piles and fendering system on the east section of the Northwest Dock at Fisherman's Terminal in the amount of $550,000. The total preliminary estimated cost of the project prior to design work and completion of the engineer's estimate is $4,793,000. And here to present are Kenny Lyles and Tim Leopard.
Good afternoon, President Bryant, Commissioners, and Mr. Thomas. Here with me today is Project Manager Tim Leonard. We are here today on behalf of Fisherman's Terminal, home port of the North Pacific Fishing Fleet, to request $550,000 for permitting, design, and project management for the renewal and replacement of the Northwest Dock fender system east of Dock 2. And behind you, you'll see an aerial photo that we brought along for reference. The highlighted area is the portion of the Northwest Dock that we are referring to. The Northwest Dock was constructed in 1987, and the east portion primarily provides moorage for the largest commercial fishing vessels at Fisherman's Terminal. As such, it is a critical asset within this facility. Vessels that moor in this portion or tie up in this portion of the Northwest Dock are typically 120 feet and larger. The types of vessels that tie up in this portion of the Northwest Dock are trawlers, catcher processors, factory longliners, and crabbers. We are proposing steel fender replacement we are proposing to replace the current wooden fender piles with steel. This will be a long-term improvement to the facility and serve the North Pacific fishing fleet's large vessels' berthing needs over the next 50 years. The Northwest Dock is essential to the Fisherman's Terminal overall contribution to the economic vitality of the region. And for details of this request, we have Tim Leonard.
Good afternoon, Commissioners, Mr. Thomas. As Kenny mentioned, we're here to talk about the east portion of Northwest Dock, which comprises about 1,370 lineal feet and consists of about 149 timber piles, which are all predominantly creosote treated. As Kenny had mentioned, and as shown in this photo, you've got the larger vessels of the commercial fishing fleet berthed at this dock, and as such, the timber piles out there take quite a bit of wear and tear. The other aspect of the berthing that takes place here is that the ships are typically stern-tied, which means that you're consolidating a load more. The impact is greater on each individual particular pile. We've got a couple photos here that show typical damage that occurs with the piles out there. Subsequently, you go through this cycle of crushing and the common deterioration that occurs with timber piles over the years. And as you can see, the crushing impacts that are absorbed by these piles tend to accelerate that deterioration. In 2007, a pile survey performed at Fisherman's Terminal determined that the majority of the piles on the east portion were in poor condition and in need of replacement within 2 years. Typically out here, we're experiencing a 10 to 15-year service life on timber piles, again, due to the wear and tear that they have to absorb from the vessels. As a result of the timber piles that are in poor condition, we have the risk of failure of the fender system, which is timber as well, at various locations along the east portion of the Northwest Dock. So, as Kenny mentioned, we're proposing to replace the timber pile and fender components with a steel pile and fender system with a 50-year service life. This service life would be consistent with the remaining service life in the Northwest Dock's structural components. So the overall dock as a whole would have 50 years of service life to be gained from it. The fender pile system on the west portion, which was also looked at as part of the pile survey, just for your information, which is basically over here and includes these two finger docks. The piles in that area actually are in much better condition, again, due to the smaller vessels and the type of moorage that goes on there. So it's anticipated that those piles won't need to be replaced for approximately 10 years. So that's why we've looked at this. It's subdividing the Northwest Dock essentially into two separate assets now and replacing the east portion, addressing that need. We're here again today to ask for money in conjunction with design and permitting. That's anticipated to be completed by this summer, at which time we will come back and request construction funding. The construction is targeted to occur in the 2010-11 freshwater fish window, which begins October 1st and runs through April 15th. All construction is anticipated to be completed by the summer of 2011. Total project cost has been preliminarily estimated at this point to be between $3.9 and $4.8 million. The final cost will depend on various design as well as construction market intangibles to be determined further as part of the design. And again, when we return this summer for the construction funding, we will have prepared a final construction estimate to base that construction funding request upon. So at this time, I'd be glad to address any questions you might have.
Commissioner Creighton.
Thank you, President Bryant. Now, and thank you, Kenny and Tim. Not to get too into the details, but I'm just curious. A few meetings back, we had an agenda item before us with respect to a pilot project to look at fiberglass fender pilings, and I know with the pilings you can have concrete. What goes into the decision in terms of what material to use in general and also on this project?
Well, the plastic pile project that I think you're referring to, Commissioner, was at the East Timber Pier at the Maritime Industrial Center. And actually, that's kind of a new product to be using for piles. One of the major factors is what type of impact that pile has to withstand, as well as how it holds up over the years. It's kind of, being a new product, the intent was with that project essentially, and it was considered an ideal project because it is a smaller pier, and I think there were 18 piles total put in. But the intent, as I understand it, was to install those for further monitoring, see how they hold up over the long term before we would invest a major capital investment in that type of product. Another factor, too, that factors into that is also the depth of the pile and the depth of the water there. And again, the type of ships that are berthing there playing a part. So the East Timber Pier, whereas it was considered an ideal situation, there's still some questions involved in using that type of product in this use. So essentially we're monitoring that installation and then for potential use in the future, but it's too soon, it's felt, to go ahead and commit to that type of pile at this point.
Thank you. More than I ever wanted to know about pilings, but thank you. That's good information.
There you go.
Are there any other questions or comments?
No, that sounds like it.
Let me just point out that unlike the previous projects in which we voted today, which were covered either by airport funds or by operating income, this is a project that will be funded by the tax levy. Any other questions or comments, or is there a sense of how we want to proceed?
Mr. President, I'd like to move that we authorize the CEO to enter into design, planning, et cetera, of the timber pile replacement for agenda item 6F.
It's been moved by Commissioner Albro. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Holland, and this time there really was a first and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, the same sign. The motion carries. Thank you very much. Mr. Thomas, that concludes our action items, but we have, I think, one briefing yet.
Yes, as you know, we've already heard item 7A at the beginning of the agenda, so the next and final item is a briefing on the Consolidated Rental Car Facility Program. And here to make the presentation are George England, Jim Schoen, and Janice Zahn.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Nice to see you again. This is another monthly update of the rental car facility program, and I'll kick it off to Janice to review construction. I'll cover the design, and Jim Schoen's attending in response to Commissioner questions regarding CFC collections.
Okay, good afternoon, Commissioners. Okay, so as you can see, we are making a lot of progress on the project. Go ahead, George, the next one. We show you some slides of the project with different things we're working on. We're pretty much working throughout the site, and we're more than a third of the way done. As we put in attachment A, we've got 250 workers on an average daily basis, up to 270 on concrete placement days. We are more than halfway through with our post-tension decks, and we've logged 460,000 work hours since the project started. So quite a bit of work. In the last month, with our good weather, we have gained back 6 days of delay that we'd had when we had a bunch of rains and cold spell. So we are now about 2 or 3 days behind on our critical path, which with the duration we have left, we're doing well. We had a meeting about a week ago to look at our schedule and opportunities and risks coming up, and we did identify some areas where the contractor is going to look at shifting some other work plans to free up some of the schedule items that are a little closer to the critical path. So we're looking at those. We, on the cost side, are still tracking. Next. There we go. Okay, our next slide hasn't changed too much. We're still tracking that we have about $23 million within the construction contract that is unallocated to deal with issues that come up during construction within the base contract. And in our contingency, we are still tracking about $10 million in suspension costs by the time the dust settles out of the 16.8 that we had originally forecast. So we're doing well. There are 5 items in dispute with some of our subcontractors, and we are in the middle of settling the suspension change order with our prime contractor, Turner. So those pieces are going well. I did want to let you know that we have been meeting on a monthly basis with our managers, and we look at 7 different metrics and generate a scorecard. So one of the things we're going to do in upcoming months is actually put that in the briefing for you, because what we've identified over the months is that there are 9 things that are important in a construction project, things related to schedule, payments, cost growth, quality, safety, and so on a monthly basis we're going to add that in here as well, so you can see what management's thinking about. And management meaning that's construction management, project management, our contractor, as well as our designer. We meet on a monthly basis. So anyway, that's all I had.
All right, well, thank you, Janice. Moving on to some design updates. I did want to point out that the contractor and one of their subcontractors put in a proposal to offer up a different type of lighting for the facility. We've evaluated that, but Turner, due to some concerns about that proposal, is not willing to submit a substitution, which is the mechanism that proposal would come to the port for final evaluation and whether we accept or not. So at this point, it appears to be a non-issue. The port has no further action on it. I did want to point that out to the commission in case word came to them about this lighting proposal. Then moving on to design, I'm pleased to report that our off-site roads package was advertised for bids for construction on March 10th, and we opened bids scheduled for April 6th. We continue to still refine and improve the specifications for the bus maintenance facility. That is still a concern in terms of the overall schedule, and the scheduled opening is driven by the bus maintenance facility. But again, as I reported last time, we continue to evaluate, we've narrowed it down to two options that have some significant importance to being able to close the gap between the bus maintenance facility completion and when the rental car facility completes, as a way to try and open up the facility sooner than driven by the bus maintenance facility. So we are on schedule to report to the industry to get their buy-off on those two options on April 14th, so perhaps at the next update we'll be able to have a good message back to the commission on this one. I do want to also point out we got our request for qualifications for a design consultant for the last design project, if you will, the main terminal improvements, which deals with wayfinding and getting customers to the curbside for the future busing operations. And that one, we expect proposals next Monday. And then lastly, the bus purchase is out on the street, and that one, proposals are due on April 13th. We did hold an industry technical meeting, and that was to kick off the design of the tenant improvements by each of the rental car companies for their exclusive use premises. So they're beginning that process. In addition, we've developed a draft activation plan that has now been submitted to the industry for their review. And this is a very important plan because it's basically to bring all of the project elements together and make sure we get everything set up to eventually open the facility on an overnight cutover. So this is a big deal. This is a very important element of the program. And then just lastly, the budget slide, nothing really new to report. We still are tracking well, as Janice reported, our contingency. We do expect perhaps soon to transfer money out of Turner's contract that will replenish contingencies and perhaps give us an opportunity to put more excess funds into the unallocated contingency bucket at this point. And then we'll now turn it over to Jim Schoen to really cover some minor changes we've made to this slide and to address the questions by Commissioner Tarleton, I believe.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. You may recall from last month's RCF update, the data that we put in front of you showed an $800,000 difference between what was forecasted for the end of 2009 and what had been collected, and that is what led to, as I understand it, Commissioner Tarleton's question, do we have a problem about this? So before I get into explaining the numbers that you see today, just by way of background, the Recondo feasibility analysis, which was done in the spring of 2009 and is shown on this chart, that was the basis for the rental car companies, then your, and ultimately the financial market support for this project. That analysis projected transaction days on an annual basis. For purposes of our analysis and given the scrutiny of this project, we ultimately broke that into on our own doing, broke that into a monthly forecast for purposes of tracking. And so that's what you see on the chart. The 3209 CFC forecast is that monthly forecast that was driven by the Recondo feasibility analysis. And then the second line there is the CFC actuals, and then the third line is the Recondo forecast. And again, because that was done on an annual basis, you see just one number there for December of '09. The data that you saw last month showed an $800,000 deficit in that, led to the question. We then went back and looked at what was going on with the numbers, and we actually found some errors in the calculations that were being made. And so when we trued everything up, we actually ended the year back comparing to the Recondo feasibility analysis that we were $100,000 ahead. You see a slight variation there between the December of '09 for the 3209 CFC forecast projected to the right chart here. I apologize, you're having a hard time, but I'm having a hard time reading that from this distance. So in December, for the 3209 forecast, it was 82.1. The actuals came in at 82.3. The Recondo feasibility said 82.2. And again, that $100,000 difference between the Recondo feasibility and the forecast is just due to that monthly variation, due to all the variables that go into that calculation. So going back to Commissioner Tarleton's original question, we don't have a problem at this point as it relates to the CFC collections.
If you were to put that, where does the Recondo feasibility doc go for December of '10?
I don't have that with me, Commissioner Bryant, but I can certainly send that to you. We have a forecast. Let's see. The challenge of trying to be prepared for every question that you might have a fair amount of paper here. So we had transactions, which is what drives the CFC's forecast for 2010, or excuse me, CFC revenues forecast for 2010 at $21.23 million, and that compares to so I guess cumulatively, yeah, if you add that plus the 82.2 there, and yes, we're right on track, but that compares what we forecast for 2010, 21.23, compares to what we actually received in 2009. You're seeing a cumulative total there. On my spreadsheet that just shows the annual total, that was 21.822.
So it needs to be somewhere in that box right around the
yes.
Okay. And we're looking, are we still looking at an open CFC of 6?
Well, and this is what, in the document that you have in front of you, we proposed coming back to you in August with a more detailed update. The CFC collections are only one of the 4 major components that impact the thing that you and the rental car companies are ultimately most concerned about, which is that opening day customer facility charge. The Recondo feasibility analysis, again done in the spring of 2009, forecasted an opening day CFC of $6.50. That's what the rental car approval was based on and your approval back at that point in time. We then went out and sold all of the bonds for this project. Based on how that bond sale went, that led to a reduced forecast in that CFC all the way down much closer to $6. But again, that's only one component of all of these things that go into calculating that opening day CFC. Our recommendation was to come back to you in August. This chart that you see here was developed back at a time when we were very concerned about the $20 million loan that the port had made to the project, and we had to watch our CFC collections very closely to ensure that we didn't go over that limit that you had set. So this chart was really designed for a different time. Now the project is fully funded, And our plan would be to come back to you in August with a different mechanism designed to help you evaluate how we're doing relative to that opening day CFC forecast, which would include not only CFC calculation or the collections to date, we'd have 6 more months of the capital costs. As was also mentioned, we'd have some of the additional bids on things like buses and the roadway improvements projects that are due to come in between now and then. And we'd be able to paint a much better picture for you at that time as compared to just looking at CFC collections as to what the impact is on that opening day CFC.
Is this data available in terms of rental car days from other airports?
In terms of how each one of them,
how much they're up and down?
We are able to get that. We also collect have data on how other airports, what their CFC costs are.
I just know that like Phoenix is another destination. It's pretty much the only airport. If you're going there, you got to fly into Phoenix.
Right.
They have a CFC of 6.
Right.
I just wonder if there's been a drop off or if they're maintaining that pretty successfully.
I just received data today that shows it isn't about the specific changes in the CFC, but in terms of the CFCs around the country, and Phoenix is one of the highest in the country. Dallas-Fort Worth is another one at that $6 threshold. We can certainly get that data when we come back in August to show how we're doing relative to the other airports. I did speak with Lori Tellerico, who is, you may recall, the head of the negotiating committee for the rental car companies, to get her take on what does this year look like compared to last year. And anytime I ask the rental car companies, they always say, well, give me your forecast. And that's always a bit of a challenge, particularly last year, given that what we saw happen last year was that there was a decline in the rental car transactions per origin and destination passenger greater than the drop in enplanements. And it was one of the lowest ones that we have seen in terms of our history of collecting data. So my question to Lori was, what do you see coming? Is this going to get any better? And her response just yesterday was that they don't expect this year to be any worse than last year, and there's a hope that things will get better, but they feel like they have at least seen the bottom.
So.
I agree.
Others? No?
I had a couple questions more going to the change orders, and I'm not recalling at last month's briefing what the number of non-suspension related change orders that were in place and pending were, and my question is, what's our rate of change orders kind of entering our project budget? We've got 140 change orders executed and 75 pending as of this report, and how did that compare to last month, and how many change orders are we typically executing?
Well, I can tell you that for the pending, that we've been hovering at, actually, I'm going to say, sorry, for pending change orders, 3 months ago we had 100 pending. Now we're down to about 75 or 70. So every month we are processing more, but there are still additional ones that show up as additional costs. If you want, as one of our measures, we can start looking at that, because one of the things I've asked staff for is it would be helpful to look at both the current total and the total amounts, both in terms of the project snapshot where we tell you, how many miles of post-stationing. Well, 20 miles out of 50 or out of 100. So we will look at adding that piece.
Yeah, I would appreciate that.
But I can tell you right now we have several hundred changes trended, and some of them go away as canceled, some of them show up as real change orders.
What is the Walker, in the briefing memo, we have a bullet point, continue evaluating the remaining Walker claim of $427,780. What is that?
Commissioner, that's basically after the fact design claims that Walker presented to us. Well, it probably goes back as far as late 2008. So far to date, and we are in the process of processing an amendment to pay them well, to show that we pay them $102,000 of this $423, but that the fact that we had actually overpaid them during design, so there really is a no-cost change order, but it accounts for $102,000 of this $400. We actually have had an opportunity to meet with them, with council in the room, back in early March. We set a deadline to have their request for equitable adjustment for the balance, which is about $315,000. We have yet to have any response, and they've missed that deadline. Our response back to them, and they've been just totally unable to show entitlement, nor really equate that entitlement to dollars, yet they can send us a letter with that amount stated in it. So we have a ways to go. This has actually been on the table for what is equating to about 2 years, and it's really in their court to respond.
And so said a little differently, we're highly unsympathetic to their claim.
Yes, you might say that.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? No? Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Thomas, do you have any new business to bring before us?
No, we don't.
And commissioners, anybody have any new business? Hearing none, at 3:15, we are adjourned.